Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Mat Chat. We're brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. Today, I'm joined by my buddy, my good friend from Pennsylvania, the PA Cadet Director, who they just doubled up in Fargo, Kyle Martin. Kyle, thanks for finally getting on the show, brother.
I appreciate it. I got some practice interviews in with you early on, so now I feel a little more comfortable about this whole thing.
Let's explain that. How many years ago was that? Was that 2017?
I think it was 2017, first met you and just meshed like this as roommates. And I got my first practice interview at the Olympic Training Center with you. So now I feel like I'm a pro.
You are a pro, yeah. So you were up there coaching, and I was up there sort of in a pseudo coaching / media role, and we ended up being roommates and just talked a lot about wrestling and philosophy and stuff like that. And it struck me just you have one of the more selfless views of wrestling. I talk to a lot of people, and it seems like the higher up I go, the more that's true. But on the lower levels, people are always trying to, like Fargo's a perfect example, right? Like you win the tournament and I'm claiming you. I was your coach. And then I got 3 other guys that went 0-2 and I don't claim them. I don't claim them. It's like, look, you're not as good as your best wrestler. You're not as bad as your worst wrestler, but you can't just claim one and not the other, right? I mean, I think kids notice that, right?
Right. And that's unbelievably important, especially if you want to continue to be successful at that level. Because, just looking at it from the cadets, I get to have experiences with these guys for 2 years in competition. A lot of our first year cadets this year didn't podium. But if we want to continue winning titles, we need those guys next year. And if their experience is positive, if they're having fun at camp, if they know that they are valued on the team, even if they may have went 0-2, then that makes them come back. That makes them want to train through the summer or through the winter, train through the spring to come back and make the team because the experience was fun. I personally had 4 of our high school guys that I just got hired at Fargo. None of them made it to the podium, but all of them had a blast. So I'm hoping that continues. And I think that's why it's so important.
Yeah. I also think this on a much bigger 50,000 foot level. If you're coaching kids, you should do it because you love kids.
Right.
And I think a lot of these guys are they couldn't make it in a big pond. So they find a small pond and then they try to make themselves the biggest deal they can there. And, they choke the life out of whatever small role of authority they have. And it's kind of embarrassing, I think I had a guy this weekend tell me about one of the team leaders and what was going on, and it just was brutal, like verbal abuse and screaming at people and everything else. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's a wrestling tournament, right? Like
exactly. And they're just kids. They're kids.
Yeah, right. So let's talk about the cadet team. So start me at the beginning. How long have you been the cadet director?
So I don't really count the COVID year, because we shut down pretty much everything. But so it'd be 3 years as the cadet director. I got kind of nominated into it, and I was kind of on the fence of whether I was in for it. I never have been in any type of leadership like that at the state level. But and I talked to you about it at the time, and a few other people, and it seemed like I could handle it and do it, and I jumped into it, and I've been doing it 3 years. Hopefully continue to get elected into that position because I really enjoy it and I like working with that age group and it's fun. I'm having a blast doing it.
I remember us talking about that and, I would like to consider myself a fairly pragmatic person and, hey, what are the tasks? Do you have the time for this? Because you're in the middle of like your dissertation or PhD or something, something to make you officially smarter than me. I can't remember which thing it was.
I still don't know if it's official.
No, it's official. You got a certificate. It's official.
That's right. But yeah, and it was just getting some other people's input. The people that you value, you want to surround yourself with people that not only are going to give you good feedback, but also kind of support you in your journey. And it was good that I had that tight knit group, individuals like you that led me into it, because I've loved almost every second of it.
Yeah, and certainly there's politics and things like that, and we probably won't dip into that. But yeah, there's nothing that's good worth doing that there isn't suffering, right?
Right.
You know, I mean, there's no pleasure without pain, so to speak. So, um, so Pennsylvania is the double cadet Fargo champs,
Right.
and I'm always interested in finding out really the why or the how behind the what. I mean, so the what is you guys won. So let's start off with
Right.
congratulations. Obviously, that's why you're on the show and you're my friend. But the what sort of speaks for itself. I mean, we got the pictures with the trophies and all that sort of thing.
Right.
I'm going to say one thing, which I know you'll agree with, which is there's a lot of talent in Pennsylvania, right?
Right.
It's one of the best wrestling states in the country. By any metric, it's a top 5 state. And top 5 might be too low, but just to give respect to some other states.
Right.
So you're starting out with a nice talent base, right? But
yes.
What do you think Pennsylvania, and I won't say what Kyle Martin's doing, what do you think Pennsylvania is doing well at the cadet level to optimize that talent?
I think primarily, and this has kind of thrown a wrench into it, I think primarily is every year we find out what we're doing wrong, and we try to make those little adjustments throughout. So every year we can improve a little bit, whether it's getting our best wrestlers in folk style to take the chance and jump into freestyle and Greco-Roman, whether it is adjusting how we set up our qualifying system, whether it's how we are revisiting how we're selecting national teams. I think it's just a slew of variables every year that we look at, and we make minor adjustments. I heard this example years and years ago that it's like flying a plane. If you're flying a commercial plane, you don't make these like 90-degree hard turns. You're not doing circles in the air to try to change. You're making little small adjustments to get to your destination. What's nice is we kind of reach that destination where we're getting national success, right? Like you said, the what is we won the Greco and freestyle. Now we need to make it to where we make little adjustments so that we're staying ahead of the game. We don't want to just rest on, we won freestyle the last 3 years. We wanted to be hungry this year to win both styles, right? So we made that push for Greco. We made that push to get our best freestyle guys to kind of take that leap in and dip their toes into Greco so that they were interested in staying after. We still lost from freestyle to Greco, some of our big names, some of our heavy hitters, but we had a lot of guys that didn't All-American in freestyle that were close. And whatever reason, early on, they're like, I don't think I'm gonna try Greco. I'm not comfortable with it yet. Just getting on the stage in freestyle a little bit, getting close, losing the blood round or the round before the blood round, they're like, I'm close. And then they jumped into Greco. So I think it's these little adjustments. The training in Pennsylvania is fantastic. It's really easy to be the cadet director when you have so many fantastic clubs and club leaders. I mean, Jody Stripmatter with Young Guns on the western side of the state, Will Betancourt with Law, Lehigh Valley, Steen with Bad Karma, David Taylor with M2, Marky McKnight. I could just ramble off all these club leaders that we have. So when we get them ready for camp and everything like that, we don't need to have these grind out, mean, brutal camps that like I experienced as an athlete. You were wasted at the end of Fargo camp, and then you go to Fargo and you're like, God, sometimes 10, 15 matches in 2 tournaments. So we've really pulled that back a ton, and our camps are little fine-tuned things. Like this year, we were just it was unreal. We had Mark Hall in there, Sammy Sasso. We had some coaches from Lehigh. We had Headley from Pitt, and they're showing we're not doing grind out 2-hour practices. We're doing an hour and a half of little things that will be valuable at Fargo. Trying not to get anybody, first of all, injured. You want to make sure everybody gets to camp and gets to Fargo without any injuries. And then also just kind of fine tuning little things, match scenarios, match situations. And that seems to be be working for us, because like I said, these guys are training with elite coaching all year. It's almost like we don't want to get in their way right before Fargo.
Yeah, so I've wrestled in that tournament, and I've scouted and recruited that tournament, and I've covered it media-wise. But this was the first year I was on a coaching staff, which was interesting. First of all, the hardest thing to do is wrestle in it, but the next hardest thing to do is coach it.
Yeah.
It's way harder than, like, I was laughing. I was talking to somebody, and they're like, how is this comparison to recruiting? And I go, oh, recruiting it, man. You go out, talk to all the coaches,
Right.
you know, catch somebody who's got a few cocktails in them, and they tell you the truth about a few kids. You come in at 10:30 the next morning, and, you know,
that's it.
The kids that you're going to recruit won the first round anyway, so it's all good. You know, where when you're on the staff, you're getting in the bus at 6:30. You know, you're doing bed checks the night before.
Right.
So it's an interesting process. You know, I have a lot of respect for the coaches. Missouri was not able to do a camp this year. It's not their fault. It's just the way it happened with COVID and all this other stuff. But you could tell we got lost in a lot of late match scenarios, and we had a lot of guys really just like, we had a really good kid lose like a 7. He's winning 7-0 and lost, you know, like a lot of those scenarios. So when you guys are doing your camp, are you guys going through a lot of, hey, 30-second left scenarios? Are you working with your coaches on when is a good brick challenge, when isn't? You know, tell me a little bit about what camp is like.
So, so just like with Missouri not having camp, our camp was cut a little bit short. It was tough to find somebody to host, 200 plus kids. Alvernia University stepped up right outside of Philadelphia, so we went there for the 3 days. But what we like to do at the end of every practice is our coaches review the same kind of talking points to get it into their heads, so that they're at least familiar with scenarios that they're going to see. The first 30 seconds coming out of a break are unbelievably important if it's a 1-0 match, right? You want to be the one that's pushing pace. You want to be, so you're not put back on that shot clock, and it's 1-1 and you're just the bad luck guy. So little things like that, the mental side of stuff that a lot of Pennsylvania guys don't really need in the qualification system at the state tournament. But when you get to this level where everybody's very good, it's those little things that make a difference. So hitting that every single practice, even if it's just sitting them down at the end and talking over it. I think in total, we did 15 minutes of live wrestling over 3 days, and none of it was more than maybe 15 or 20 seconds at a time. And it was in this, we put them in situations. All right, here's the situation. You're down a point, 15 seconds left. Right, we got to get a clean attack. We can't get something where somebody ties us up. And at the same time, we don't really, and we haven't in the last 2 camps focused on when to throw the challenge brick, when not. We haven't really focused with the coaching part of it. I have a lot of trust in our coaches. I think all the coaches have a lot of trust in each other, that they're aware. I don't think we had a terrible success percentage with challenge bricks. It'd be interesting to find out. What our success rate was, because that could be something we make a little adjustment for next year. But the camp needs, I think, modern times, especially in Pennsylvania with the grind of our season, the grind that a lot of these guys compete in, needs to almost be that I don't want to say peaking, because we're not doing the short, intense stuff. We're almost like we want to plateau here and get our bodies to feel 100% over that camp, to where when we go to the first round of Fargo, we feel as good as possible, because that's going to be a short-lived feeling. Because after you get 2-3 matches in you, right?
Feel like crap, yeah.
Yeah, we had one athlete took third in both styles. He lost in the round of 62 in freestyle, won 10 matches in a row to take third, and then he jumps into Greco.
What a hammer! What a hammer!
Right. And then he does the same thing in Greco, except I think he lost in the semis in Greco and came back and took third. So that kid's wrestled, 18, 19 matches over the course of 5 days. I don't know how you can effectively prepare for that. But I know having a grind out nasty camp is not how to do it.
You know, I talked to Randy Couture about this years ago, and he was saying how, you know, Randy's older than me and I'm older than you. And he was saying how back when they were doing it, like they were overtraining, right?
Right.
That, you know, and that the Russians were over there like, you know, like they're playing like dodgeball or, you know, whatever the equivalent was. And, you know, I think there's sort of that the hay is in the barn kind of thing, right? Like,
Right.
you know, like I coach a lot of MMA and I'm always shocked. Like there's always one dumb coach in the back showing a guy something like a new technique 45 minutes before the guy fights, right?
Right.
And I'm like, either you need to know this and this is really bad for the guy's psyche, right? Or you don't need to know this and you're just wasting his mental energy. And if I'll say I'm your coach because I'm older than you, if there's something you needed to know, I probably shouldn't be telling you about it 45 minutes ahead of time when we had an 8-week training camp for one guy. It's a little different in wrestling, right? Like in wrestling, like, you know, the quarters come through and then the semis. And I'm like, hey, man, this guy always gut wrenches to the left. Or this guy always laces, you know, right leg over left. Or he's a lefty swing single. Or, you know, he's got a really good head pinch. You know, that's different, okay? I mean, that's different. And really, you're just telling your wrestler about tendencies. And sometimes you got to be a little careful about that too, because you don't want to paralyze your guy by saying, here's what this other guy's so good, right?
Right. And you know what? Early on, whenever I started as the cadet director, I noticed that a little bit where coaches, they have their set technique, they have stuff that works for them, and they want to throw it at the athletes. And it's all in good nature, right? They want the best for the athlete, but I don't think the Fargo camp is the best time to do that. And it's the same scenario you're talking about. And that's why I say maybe sometimes we got to get out of their way. They've earned their spot to Fargo. So they're obviously doing some things that are working pretty well. So maybe we let that technique roll and we fine tune little things with their technique. And then obviously we scout as much as we can while at Fargo. But like you said, you don't want to over scout to where you take away and kind of paralyze our guy.
Yeah, I think you can overcoach, right? You can overcoach and undercoach always. Like, I mean, those are obviously two, you know, like when I was doing jujitsu, I would go to these, you know, I would go to class and these guys would teach you all these things, but none of them were connected. Like in wrestling, it'd be like showing a high crotch and then like showing like a left-sided headlock. And you're like, okay, but these don't work together, right? I'm not saying they're both not good moves, whatever. I mean, you can certainly argue about the validity of a left-sided headlock and how often you're going to use it, but whatever, right? But these things that connect, you know, or make much more sense. Like, hey, as opposed to, okay, like we're going to level change, get in, we're on low level. Here's 6 different finishes. You know, you do A, I do B, you do C, I do D, etc. And I feel like that's, you know, that's where I feel like maybe you could help these guys in camp. Maybe some of the guys that aren't as good, as developed, as polished, maybe the guys that come from one of those awesome clubs like you were talking about, where they don't have that super high level. They don't have a David Taylor, a Jody Strittmatter, a Betancourt, and you know, all those other guys you named, Drew Headley, whoever. I don't want to skip anybody, but and so you're like, hey man, when this guy, you do this, he does this. Do you know what to do next? I'm like, no. You're like, okay, you know, like, because there's probably guys like that, right? Where that's the other thing too. It's hard to, you assume these guys are really good, but we had a guy that won nationals. He didn't know how to drop step right. I'm not kidding.
That's like, impressive.
Yeah, it was really tough. But once he learned how to drop step, he was like running people through tables. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You hit on a very, like, the most important word there, connect. If you want any athlete, I don't think it matters age group. I think how you connect them is something that could be a conversation that could go for hours. But the key is connecting them to it. And, you know, like you said, go high crotch and then show left-handed headlocks. You're not connecting anything. But if you do these progressions, right? We get to step one. Here's the options of what happens. And this is connecting to that athlete in that progression every single time. I think that's the most important part. But I think that goes even beyond the technical side of it. You have to do that with like mental preparation too. You have to do that with, as we're seeing right now with the Olympics, mental health is unbelievably important to athletes. Now, we're not at the Olympic level at Fargo, but guys that win Fargo, men and women that win Fargo, they're going to be in the hunt to make world teams, right? So we got to make the connection somehow to where they're enjoying it. But also when we are in technical sessions and we're showing technique, it's got to be valuable to them, and it's got to connect to other things that they're comfortable with. If we want to make that step and make it applicable, because if there's no connection, I feel like you're just wasting a ton of time.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, I think that you get sometimes like, okay, like you got out of bounds with 20 seconds left, you're losing by 1. There's probably very little chance I'm going to yell some secret move to you that's going to win the match, right?
Right.
It's more just like we look at each other's eyes, and we've been running together, and we've been cutting weight together, and we've watched film together. And I care about you. I love you. You're my guy, and you just find a way to win.
Right.
And so I think if guys don't have that, or, athletes don't have that, it's difficult. I will say this about Fargo. It's, first of all, if people haven't been, it's got its whole energy to it that's completely different than anything else. It's like its own breathing mechanism, organism. Like I run a fairly big charity event, and it's like, I told you, once it starts, I just get out of the way. Like, I'm not actually doing anything. But Fargo, the most money you can make in high school in wrestling, besides NIL, is winning Fargo your junior year in freestyle.
Right.
So that's a fact. I mean, it's more important than winning Super 32s or Ironman. Probably the only other equivalent might be like the World Team Trials and then winning the Worlds, the Junior Worlds. Okay. But kids are smart. I mean, social media is, everybody's aware now. Like, that's the tournament. So if you're a junior and you're going in there and you're not getting the looks you want, the offers you want, people, like, hey man, I got to step up. This is it.
Yeah, this is my chance. And that adds, unneeded pressure, but some guys thrive with that sort of pressure, right? They step up and you start getting these names that you haven't heard of that are high on the podium. They're in the finals. They're winning titles, and like, I have these guys up until this point. And it's an interesting environment, and it's like you said, it's its own beast. And I think that energy that it just exudes is how we can get through the 8 or 9 days of it as coaches.
Yeah, Henry Cejudo put out a video this morning about his take on Simone Biles, and I won't get into it, but the one statement he said, which is true, is pressure either bursts pipes or creates diamonds. And I think that's separate from Simone Biles. I think that's a accurate sentence. Athletes, I shouldn't say guys, athletes, John Smith, pressure is a privilege. Like, I think you have to embrace pressure. Like, you can't just go, well, it doesn't exist. Like, well, of course it exists.
Right.
When you're in the finals of Fargo, there's your chance to be a national champion.
Right.
Like, someone in 6 minutes is going to be a national champion, or 4 minutes, depending on the age group. So and there's not going to be overtime. Somebody's winning, somebody's losing the whole time, all that kind of stuff. You got these 2 periods to get it done. And I think where wrestling's really good is that's a metaphor for life, right? Like, you walk into the business meeting, right? Like, you don't get to do a terrible presentation and then come back, hey, can I come back tomorrow? I didn't have my lucky tie on. Like, no, you didn't get the job, right?
Right.
You're on a first date and it doesn't go well. Like, oh, I had 4 great stories I forgot to tell you. Like, no, sorry.
They would have won you over, though. Those would have been the go-tos.
Those were the stories, yeah. Just out there bumbling through life, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So, one last question about PA before we switch over to something else. Do you guys assign athletes and coaches to each other, or is it just sort of a catch as catch can kind of thing?
So with the sheer number of athletes, it's pretty tough. What we try to do is a lot of athletes, and we had quite a bit of coaches. A lot of athletes have like their go-to coach that they kind of get a relationship with in camp, and they kind of start fizzling to that coach. And we try to make that happen. Obviously, in the early rounds, sometimes that doesn't. But we do have a process where we make sure no athlete goes out to a match or walks to a mat without a coach. So one of the things I really hustle with in the background is so if we have an athlete that has to have really comfortable with Coach Headley, right? Coach Headley's already out on a mat somewhere. So if there's no coaches there that they're comfortable with, I'll snag the kid up, walk him to a mat, and then I'll text Coach Headley. Then he makes his way over. Coach Abe, Sonny Abe, has several guys in every tournament. I'll do the same thing for him as long as I'm not caught on a mat somewhere. So our process isn't very structured, but it's worked so far to where, especially in the big matches, as the tournament starts to thin out, our guys are getting at least their most comfortable coach that they have there, and preferably two of the guys that have connected with them at camp, or it's their club coach. Like, we're lucky that Coach Stripmatter comes out. He brings a couple of young gun coaches with him. We have coaches from Law that are there, Bad Karma. So it's they have their club coaches, but if they don't, we make it work by where they're connecting with guys at camp.
Gotcha. So let's switch over to the USA Wrestling stuff. Explain to people what you've done in terms of international trips the last couple of years.
So my first international trip was in Panama, and it was right before COVID. It was November 2019. So right before COVID.
Yeah.
That was a blast. It was my first international coaching experience. Obviously, you learn a lot. It was U15 age group, which we took an American team to Panama, and Freestyle and Greco didn't lose an actual wrestled match. And I was like, this international stuff's pretty easy. But a few months ago, I was able to go to Mexico City with juniors for the Pan Am Games there. And man, is there a jump from cadets from U15 even to juniors at that level. When you see Cuba there, when you see Mexico had some fantastic athletes, you're starting to see that level spike. And man, you have to be a better coach when you go there. You have to improve. You have to be first of all, be on your game as best as you can, but then you also have to be constantly trying to be a sponge. I was lucky to work with Coach Dominguez, tried to pick his brain about everything I possibly could. Coach Mayab, Coach Jackson. Interesting story with that whole thing, getting into Mexico City with Coach Jackson. If you don't mind, I can tell it.
No, yeah, of course.
Okay. So I'm with three American athletes coming in from Dallas. Flying into Mexico City was an absolute nightmare. A bunch of weather in Houston, and just flights were getting delayed hours and hours and hours the following day. So we don't get into Mexico City until about 1:00 at night. We get into the transportation. The shuttle driver was waiting for another flight. So he takes us to a McDonald's parking lot. And it was a gated McDonald's, which I've never seen before, but it was pretty interesting. So we sat in this gated parking lot for about an hour and a half waiting for this flight that kept getting delayed, but then it got canceled. So then we finally get to the resort. It's about 2:30 in the morning. I get my card key for my room. I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to jump into bed. I go up to my door, swipe the key. It doesn't open, right? It's just blinking red light. And I go, man, walk back down to the gate or to the front table, and they're looking at my number and they're like, oh, somebody's already in there, just knock. And luckily, I looked at this. I looked down at the paper and I saw my roommate was Kevin Jackson. I go, you expect me to knock on the door at 2:30 in the morning and wake up Kevin Jackson? It's not happening. And then the guy at the front desk, unbelievably nice guy. He goes, oh, just knock. No big deal. So I start walking up. And as I'm walking up to the room, I'm like, man, it's already almost 3. Could I just sit out by the pool until 6 or 7 until the sun comes up? Because I am not waking up Kevin Jackson at 2:30 in the morning, right? So I go up to the door and I do this like real light knock, like, and I'm like, God, I knocked. So I walked back to the front desk and I was like, listen, I cannot wake him up.
Yeah. Can I just could you get a room?
Oh, no. So the guy, this is why he was unbelievably nice. He's like, okay. And he walked me up with a master key and opened up the door. So the beginning of the trip was kind of
KJ was passed out in there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I don't even know if I would have knocked hard if he would have woken up, but I was definitely not waking Kevin Jackson up at 2:30 in the morning. That is not happening.
Yeah.
But
I've known Kevin since I was 18 years old. I was actually his brother's roommate at Iowa State.
Really?
When Kevin was there. And Kevin was super cool to me then. I think, to be fair on that side of the story, Kevin is much more intimidating physically than he is once you meet him. He's a super genuinely nice person.
Exactly. I've met him a couple of times at the development camps out there. Unbelievably nice guy, but I'm still not waking him up at 2:30 in the morning.
No.
Just not happening.
Yeah.
But being able to pick his brain was phenomenal. Especially he had really good insight with the challenge brick. For cadets, you got to have a little shorter of a fuse because of the shorter time. With juniors, you can kind of let stuff play out. Seeing him interact with like the cadet level guys, man, hey, I tell you what, obviously he's done the things he's done for a reason. Unbelievable wrestling mind, unbelievable technical mind. But being able to pick those guys' brains and coach with them over the span of that, Coach Medina with the women, were there, and just phenomenal work ethics, phenomenal relationships with athletes. So I try to use those experiences as best I can to get better at what I'm doing. I try not to have any type of ego. I know that's a struggle all the time, but if I can maintain that lack of ego, I'm going to constantly try to pick everyone's brain, learn. I always pick your brain. I pick everybody's brain that are better at me at this, so that I can at least keep trying to catch up. And that's the whole objective, just trying to get improvement with it. But Mexico City was a blast. We won Greco for juniors. They had cadets there at the same time. That was the first time that's happened. And we won cadet freestyle and cadet Greco. We won junior freestyle and junior Greco. So it was a blast. It was a blast.
That's awesome. What is maybe one or two things, when you said you picked these guys' brains at different coaches, what's one or two things, either, from KJ or Mayab or Zach, or, I literally think all those guys have been on my podcast. So,
awesome.
and I'm so old, Mayab coached me back when I wrestled at Fargo. So,
but you guys were both young at the time. Still young. You guys are still young.
I think Mayab was probably in his early 20s when I was in high school. So, nice. Yeah. But what's one or two things those guys have taught you that or suggested to you, I think is kind of what, that we do at that level, that you've implemented either with your high school team or your life or with Fargo?
So I tell you what, it stems back to like Mike Clayton, who's the manager of Coach's Ed, and it's just always learn, right? Always learn, always be on the lookout to improve and learn. And so I do that through these guys. So like with Kevin Jackson, unbelievable technical ability, right? But he always will kind of turn it down to just being an athlete, right? You get into these wars with, guys, athletes that are training just as hard as you, doing all the right things. Sometimes it's just being a better athlete in some situations, right? You don't throw the technique out, but you don't focus on the fine tuning of, I got to make sure my hand is here. No, be an athlete, right? Fill the position out, be an athlete. With Gary Mayab, I think the best thing I ever picked up from him, and this was early on in the development camp, is as a coach, you're not coaching the athlete, you're coaching the person. And that's huge. And it's things you talked about. It's the mental side of things. It's making them enjoy the experience so that they stay with the sport. It's working on the technical stuff, right? Where can they improve as an athlete? And that ties into what Coach KJ was talking about, is being an athlete. So if we're working on the athletic skill and focusing on them as a person, as that more so than just being a wrestler, then we're going to get some great development from it. Coach Dominguez gave me some great advice. because, I'm used to working with that cadet age group. And then I worked with internationally with 15U, the development camps. I'm usually around the cadets and 15U. It was a sit down afterwards. I'm like, all right, coach, what do I got to improve on? And he goes, well, you were coaching juniors at some times. They're adults, right? They're a little different maturity. They need more specific feedback, right? You don't need to be, well, you were doing this great, all the pump up stuff, right? They're looking for that feedback right away. You got 30 seconds in between that period. What can they do in that following 3 minutes that's going to win them a match? So that was something that, I took that to heart. So now I work that in with how I handled stuff at Fargo with our juniors. And they did seem to react better to that because, again, they put in tons of work. Sometimes you get out of their way, but sometimes you got to give them that direct feedback, tell them what they need to do. And then they'll do it. They're great athletes. They're great wrestlers. So it's a little more direct. But that would be the big ones from those people, from those coaches.
Yeah, those are all super. We have a lot of coaches that watch this and listen to it. I mean, I know you and I have talked about, you've, learned some stuff from some of the guys that have come on.
Right.
I always just feel blessed. I'm like, hey, ideally, like I'm the guy sitting at the bar watching the game with whoever my guest is, and we're just talking, and we just happen to throw a recorder on it. But I think
right.
Dominguez, they're all super interesting guys in different ways. Like you said, KJ's won everything, but at the end of the day, like he'll say it's a fight. It's a fight with rules. You got to fight, and Dominguez,
right.
one of the things he said, which he certainly didn't create this, but like, hey, in freestyle, the offense is in front of you, and in Greco, the offense is behind you. And right. I think that's a very interesting way to help guys understand that are trying to get into Greco. Like, hey, pushing on a guy isn't ideal. Like that, you're now going into that guy's wheelhouse, where in freestyle, it's difficult to score going backwards. In Greco, scoring backwards is how you score, all the throws and lifts and everything else. So, I mean, and Mayab might be the only guy I know that likes Google Sheets and Excel documents more than me. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, he's a fellow dork, and I say that as a compliment. So what's next for you, man? What are you up to the next to 6-12 months?
So right now, we're in our off season at the high school I'm coaching at. We're doing some strength training. Jared King he's been my buddy since 6th grade. We wrestled together JOs through middle school, high school. He's our strength and conditioning coach, and he's also on staff with us coaching. So we'll be doing that through August. We're not going to be on the mats a ton. It'll just be kind of open mat stuff. Then we're going to start prepping for Super 32. Got quite a bit of guys that are interested in doing that. Right now, I just started actually this week putting all the stuff from Fargo together to see where we can make improvements, because we have our state meeting in September, and I want to throw those initiatives out so we can start hopefully getting that ball rolling. I picked some coaches' brains in Pennsylvania on what we can do better while we were out in Fargo. They gave some phenomenal feedback on how we can continue to be successful at Fargo. I really like our women's numbers to keep growing. Our women athletes did phenomenal. I think for cadets, we had 21 at the tournament, and 11 were All-Americans.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So our quality is high. We just now got to work on quantity, so then we can compete with California. And that's I think a big push. We're in the process in Pennsylvania trying to sanction women's wrestling as a high school sport. The PIAA is saying once we get 100 school-sponsored women's teams, we'll have it as an official sport. I think we're up to maybe 20. It's not going as quickly as maybe we thought it would, but it's process. So over the next few weeks, I'll dig into the Fargo stuff and how we can kind of hopefully sharpen up our schedule in the spring, and how we select our national teams, and how we get prep and training. We got some pretty good ideas getting thrown around. Then after that, we'll start our folk style season for a few months. Maybe luckily, if I can get put on some other international travel, hopefully we can get a development camp at the training center back up, and then we can hang out room there again and have a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But outside of that, that's like the next 6 months for me is focused on what we can do better for next year, so we can four-peat in cadets and go back to back for Greco.
Yeah. Well, I just want to close it out by saying this. You're one of the good souls in our sport. You're a person that, I said this at the beginning, you're doing it for the right reason. You remind me, this is probably the biggest compliment I can give you. You remind me of my father. Like, he coaches for the right reason. You know, like, he'd rather lose the right way than win the wrong way. And, you know, that's rare. That's really rare when a person doesn't put their own agenda ahead of others and the kids and the people they actually should be responsible for. So it's really good to see the good guys win. I don't mean like Pennsylvania. I don't know all the guys on the team. I'm not saying they're not all great guys, okay? But I mean, to see somebody like you, your hard work paying off. I'm sure we'll be texting a lot next week during the Olympics. And there is one funny story I want to tell people. So Kyle's a huge dork when it comes to figuring out the team score. And this is funny because he finds me like the first day. And I said to him, I'm like, what's the magic number? I think you told me it was 14 All-Americans and
15 All-Americans.
15 All-Americans and 60 points, because it was 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 for first through 8. And so, you know, basically 15 times the average of 4.5, give or take. You call me or text me like day and a half in, you're like, I don't know what's going on, but these points are all jacked up. So, and they went to like 25, 20, 15, whatever it was they went to. So it was, it wasn't funny because I'd been there, you know, and it isn't funny when you do all this prep work and they change it on you. But it's funny now because you won, you know.
Oh, yeah, it's completely fine now. It's hilarious.
Yeah,
it's hilarious because I was so confident in those numbers when I told you. And then I checked the team score after we were in the quarters, like midway through the quarters, and we were up to like 70 some points. I was like, wait a second, this can't be right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, brother, congratulations on everything. Glad we finally were able to have you on the show. And thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for everything you do, Coach. I appreciate you.
I appreciate it. Everybody, thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll speak to y'all next week.